Hey guys, today I'll show you a zombie horror TV series named Fear the Walking Dead, Season 1 and Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins in an abandoned church somewhere in Los Angeles, when a drug addict named Nick woke up to find that his companions had disappeared. The dimly lit room was somewhat eerie. He walked out of the room in confusion into the gloomy hall. Soon he discovered a gruesomely mangled body around the corner. Terrified, he scrambled into another room where he unexpectedly found his girlfriend crouched on the floor. As he drew closer, he saw that she was gnawing on a corpse's smelly part. Sensing Nick's presence, she rose, a dagger still lodged in her chicken body, which clearly tells that she was not a human anymore. In panic, Nick sprinted away barefoot, finally escaping out like a Tesla bike onto the road, only to be hit by an oncoming car. The streets were bustling with people, a scene of prosperity and busyness. Clearly, the local residents were unaware of the impending horror. Badly injured, Nick was taken to a hospital. His mother, a schoolteacher named Madison, arrived upon hearing the news, accompanied by Nick's stepfather, Travis, and his sister, Alicia. When they arrived, they saw Nick being questioned by police, as a concerned citizen had reported that he might be suicidal. However, Nick didn't tell the police the truth, nor did he tell his family. After all, what he saw at the church was too bizarre. Madison, aware that her rebellious son was still in a daze due to the drugs, was somewhat drained. Seeing that he was not in critical condition, she hurried back to work at the school. Upon arriving at the school, Madison learned from the principal that there was a widespread cold going around, and many students had called in sick. While they were speaking, a greasy student set off the metal detector during a security check. Madison took him to the office and found a dagger concealed on him. The boy explained that he had read about many instances of humans killing each other in other states and carried the dagger for self-defense. Madison thought the boy was overthinking things, encouraged him to read more and spend less time online, and confiscated the dagger before letting him go. Although Travis was Nick's stepfather, he was genuinely good to him and volunteered to stay and take care of him. When Nick woke up from another nightmare, unable to bear the fear and torment, he finally told Travis about the cannibalism he witnessed in the church. Travis was skeptical, but in order to investigate, he drove to the church that night. The place was usually a gathering spot for drug addicts, but tonight it was eerily quiet. Travis quickly found a pool of blood and scattered flesh in the hall. He also encountered a frantic young man who kept muttering, "Don't kill me," before disappearing without a trace. Early the next morning, Travis told his wife about what he'd seen at the church. He believed that something terrible had happened there, and what Nick had said about people eating people might be true. However, Madison didn't take it seriously. She thought Nick must have been hallucinating due to drug use. After all, it wasn't strange for there to be some violence at the church, a known hangout for thugs. Travis didn't know what else to say. Nick, feeling helpless without family support, wanted to escape the hospital to uncover the truth about the church incident. He couldn't bear the torment of fear. At this moment, a golden opportunity presented itself. The patient sharing his room suddenly had a health crisis, and all the medical staff were busy taking him to the ICU. Taking advantage of the commotion, Nick slipped out of his hospital gown into some regular clothes and escaped the hospital. When Madison found out that her son had run away, she suspected he might have gone to the church. So she and Travis went there to look for him. On the top floor of the church, they found a makeshift bed where Nick had apparently been sleeping for many days. They also found a pool of blood in the main hall. Madison realized that things might be more serious than she had imagined. They intensified their search for Nick, visiting the home of a man named Calvin, who was Nick's best friend in college. However, Calvin claimed that he had not been in touch with Nick since he started taking drugs. The couple spent the entire day looking for Nick to no avail and finally decided to head home. On their way, they ran into a massive traffic jam. Initially, they thought it was due to a car accident, but soon realized something was amiss. Sirens were blaring all around, and even rescue helicopters were involved. Bystanders were getting out of their cars to see what was happening. Upon hearing gunshots, Travis quickly got back in the car with Madison. He had an uneasy feeling and decided to take a detour. The next morning, a video of the traffic jam incident went viral on the internet. Everyone gathered around screens in shock as they watched a wounded man attack the rescue personnel. The police had no choice but to open fire, but the man took several shots and was still going strong. He only stopped moving after being shot in the head. After watching the video, the students were all terrified. The most widespread theory was that a virus was spreading through the air, causing those infected to become violent and impervious to pain. Soon, the Los Angeles government declared a state of emergency, and all schools temporarily suspended classes. Students were allowed to take the school bus home that afternoon, but Nick wasn't aware of this news. After escaping from the hospital, he went to great lengths to find the drug dealer who turned out to be his old school friend, Calvin. Nick wanted to find out if the supplies Calvin provided contained excessive hallucinogenic ingredients. Calvin, however, was not happy with Nick. He didn't want anyone to find out where he lived, and was also worried that Nick might expose his identity as a drug dealer. So Calvin lured Nick to a deserted suburb with the intention of killing him to keep him quiet. Luckily, Nick noticed the gun Calvin had hidden behind his back. A struggle ensued, and in the chaos, the gun went off, shooting Calvin, who then fell into a pool of blood. Nick, completely panicked, called Travis for help. He initially wanted to keep it from his mother, but in the end, Madison accompanied Travis to find Nick. Nick, pale-faced, confessed to killing Calvin. They rushed to the crime scene, but to their surprise, Calvin's body was nowhere to be found. Nick was in a terrible state, wondering if it was all a hallucination. In the end, they decided to head home. As they were reversing the car, a staggering figure suddenly appeared. It was Calvin. The couple immediately got out of the car to check on him, expressing their willingness to take full responsibility. But Calvin didn't say a word, and instead kept trying to bite them. At this crucial moment, Nick stepped on the gas and knocked Calvin down. To their astonishment, Calvin got up again. In desperation, Nick accelerated and hit him again, sending him flying like a blow-up toy several meters away. It's often hard for characters in zombie movies to realize they're dealing with zombies because they didn't binge-watch Daniel C.C. zombie movies in advance. However, Calvin could still move slowly. They felt that things were getting increasingly strange. Travis decided to take his family out of the city as soon as possible. He called his stepdaughter Alicia and asked her to pack up at home. However, she wasn't at home at the moment. She was at her boyfriend's place. She'd been unable to reach him lately and had grown worried. As soon as school was suspended, she rushed to his house and found him in a feverish delirium. She was by his side, caring for him. Travis and his wife sensed that something was wrong and quickly drove over to the boyfriend's place. They found a bloody bite mark on his shoulder. Although they didn't know that a bite would turn someone into a zombie, they felt something was off about her boyfriend and insisted that Alicia come home. Her boyfriend, as if knowing something, told Alicia that his family was on their way back from out of town and urged her to go home with her parents. Alicia was oblivious to the severity of the situation and reluctantly left. With Travis's current wife's family gathered, he couldn't leave his biological son, Chris, who lived with his ex-wife. Chris was on his way home from school at the moment. Seeing his dad's call, he hung up without a second thought. It turned out he had always resented Travis for treating Nick as if he were his own child, and their father-son relationship was strained. Worried about his son's safety, Travis drove towards his ex-wife's house. On the way, he saw police amassing water and supplies, clearly indicating that the government knew something but hadn't made it public yet. The roads were now heavily congested. After several detours, Travis finally arrived at his ex-wife's house, but his ex-wife hadn't recognized the gravity of the situation yet. Seeing that Chris wasn't home and without time to explain, Travis hastily used his ex-wife's phone to call Chris, only to find out that he was participating in a protest. Travis was taken aback. It turned out that not long ago, a homeless man who was unarmed was shot and killed by a police officer. Passers-by who witnessed the incident began to protest against police abuse of power. Chris happened to be passing by and joined the protest, even picking up a DV to record the scene. Travis quickly turned on the TV to find out where the protest was taking place and immediately drove his ex-wife to find their son. Over at Madison's, she was at home waiting for Travis to return, also having a difficult time. Nick was going through a drug withdrawal, and due to the busy phone lines, she couldn't reach the doctor. Madison remembered there were some medications at the school that could relieve the symptoms of withdrawal. After instructing Alicia to take good care of Nick at home, she set off for the school. As she was opening the cabinet to get the keys, a figure suddenly appeared. It was her student, who was among the first to realize the severity of the situation. He had returned to school to gather some non-perishable food for reserve. Just as they were preparing to leave the school, they saw a staggering figure. It was the principal, already turned into a zombie. Madison was about to approach him when the student quickly pulled out a dagger and stabbed at the zombie. But his strength was too small, and in a moment, he was knocked down by the zombie and rolled down the stairs like a water bucket. Seeing the student pinned under the principal, Madison finally recognized the horror of zombies. She picked up a fire extinguisher and started bashing the zombie, eventually sending him to meet Satan. After dropping the student home, Madison quickly drove home. As night fell, the city's power started to fail, and large areas began to experience blackouts. Madison finally returned home and felt relieved upon seeing that the siblings were unharmed. She then went to the bathroom alone and couldn't help but burst into tears, venting the pressures. At this point, Travis called. He wanted Madison to take the kids and leave without waiting for him, as he was trapped in a barbershop in a bad situation. It turns out that in the daytime, Travis and his ex-wife arrived at the protest site and managed to find their son Chris amidst the chaos. Without caring whether he was willing or not, they hastily dragged him away. But soon after they left, the riot police arrived at the scene. A zombie appeared and was shot dead as shit by the police, causing the scene to become chaotic. Protesters who didn't understand what was happening scattered in panic and fled for their shitty lives. Travis and his family quickly reached the streets, only to find chaos everywhere. People were venting their dissatisfaction with vandalism and violence. Seeing the situation was bad, Travis and his family sought refuge in a barber shop that was about to close. The shop owner, Daniel, initially didn't want to take them in, but his wife agreed to shelter them. They stayed there until evening, but the riot outside showed no signs of subsiding. Suddenly, the phone signal was cut off, making Madison uneasy. At this moment, they heard cries from outside and saw a neighbor being attacked by a man. Alicia wanted to rush up to help, but was stopped by her mother. Without offering an explanation, she just stood firmly at the door, looking at her daughter. As the bustling city sheds its civilized facade, scenes of looting, burning, and vandalism are everywhere. As the ignorant public indulges in a carnival of crime, almost no one notices that bloodthirsty zombies have infiltrated their midst. To avoid being affected by these fanatics, Travis and his group have been hiding in the barbershop for an entire day. But the crowd outside shows no signs of dispersing, making Travis anxious. At this moment, Chris notices that the wooden walls of the shop are heating up, indicating that a fire has been started next door. Not daring to stay any longer, Travis and Daniel's family are forced to flee the barbershop, rushing through the riotous streets. Although zombies have started to blend into the crowd, the government's armed forces are focused on the rioting crowd, even deploying water cannons to suppress them. In the chaos, a giant metal rack is knocked over, injuring Daniel's wife. Daniel picks her up and follows Travis onto a pickup truck, barely escaping the riot zone. The condition of Daniel's wife is not good. She needs to be taken to the hospital for timely treatment, or she might get an infection and risk her life. On the way to the hospital, Travis realizes that the riots are more severe than he imagined, with chaotic crowds everywhere. After a struggle, they finally reached the hospital. However, to their surprise, the hospital had already been cordoned off by armed forces. No one inside was allowed to leave. It turned out that the hospital had become a hotspot for the catastrophe. They surmised that there were very few survivors left. At this point, the Daniel family found themselves with nowhere to go, so they decided to seek shelter at Travis's place. During the day, they had taken in a distressed Travis and his family. Now it was time for Travis to return the favor. The night was pitch black, and the power in the streets along the way went out one after another. The lights disappeared, replaced by a despairing darkness. Madison and her 2 children were awaiting Travis's return, preparing to take refuge in the desert together. They were scared of this endless waiting, so the 3 started playing some game to pass the time. Suddenly, the power went out. Madison became tense. At that moment, a strange noise came from outside the house. Nick noticed that it was the neighbor's dog. It seemed to be hiding from something, constantly barking at the outside after entering the house. Nick looked out the window and saw the zombie that had attacked the neighbors earlier, staggering towards their house. He remembered that the neighbors had a hunting rifle. They needed a suitable weapon to deal with the living dead. So along with his mother and sister, Nick crossed the wooden fence and went to the neighbor's house. He successfully found the rifle, but Alicia saw a figure break into their house and quickly kill the dog. Madison also saw this and decided to hide in the neighbor's house for a while. Before long, they saw a car driving over. It was Travis and his group. Madison remembered that there was still a zombie in their house, so they had to turn back. In the darkness, Travis arrived home and called out a few times but received no response. Fortunately, the power had just been restored. He saw a zombie kneeling on the ground, gnawing at the dog's corpse. Travis was terrified. Before he could recover, the zombie lunged at him. In the nick of time, Madison rushed over with the gun, but she hesitated, unable to pull the trigger. Seeing this, Daniel grabbed the gun and without any hesitation, shot the zombie dead. However, Madison realized that her daughter was not by her side. It turned out that when they were rushing back from the neighbor's house, Alicia realized that they had left some bullets behind, so she returned to the neighbor's house. After retrieving the bullets, she suddenly saw a zombie standing behind the wooden door, its legs slightly moving, creating an eerie atmosphere. Alicia was scared to wet her pants and ran towards the side door, but she was caught by another zombie on the way. Thankfully, Chris appeared in time and helped her cross the wooden fence, escaping the danger. When everyone arrived, they were shocked to see the face of the zombie. It was a neighbor who had been very close to Madison. The next morning, Madison stood in front of her zombie neighbor with a hammer, hesitant. Just a few days ago, they were good friends who could talk about anything. Now Madison wanted to send her friend to find peace in hell, but she couldn't bring herself to bring down the hammer. At this moment, Travis rushed over and persuaded her that they didn't have the right to decide life and death for others, and perhaps the hospital has already developed a cure. After much consideration, Madison finally gave up her plan to kill the neighbor. This scene was witnessed by Daniel in the room. He shook his head and muttered his discontent. He consequently gave up his plan to take refuge elsewhere with the Travis family. He decided to stay at the house, believing that in this environment good people often die faster. As for this, Travis had nothing more to say. He could only lead his family and leave. Soon after they drove out of their neighborhood, they saw their zombie neighbor's husband cheerfully walking home, dragging his suitcase. Madison quickly got out of the car and followed him, but she was a step too late. By the time she got there, she saw the couple had already embraced. Suddenly, a gunshot echoed. The zombie's head exploded, and a team of fully armed soldiers stormed in, taking the man away for isolation because he had been splattered with the zombie's blood. Seeing the government's rescue team checking every house, Travis comforted Madison, saying that everything would get better. Their plans to seek refuge were thus canceled. However, Daniel was not as optimistic, murmuring that it was all too late. 9 days swiftly passed, and the military had finally inspected the entire block. They fenced it off with iron railings, preventing anyone from entering or leaving. The commander announced that the area within the iron fence was a complete safe zone. There were only 12 such places in all of Los Angeles. The residents, able to take refuge in their homes, should cherish and appreciate this. But when asked where the people outside the safe zone had gone, the commander evaded the question. Chris was curious about the world outside the safe zone. Due to the travel restrictions, he could only sit on the roof of his house, gazing out at the world beyond the fence. One day, he made an unexpected discovery. He saw a flash of light in a house outside the safe zone. Chris suspected it was a distress signal from other survivors, so he immediately told his father. But Travis didn't pay much attention to it, thinking it might just be sunlight reflecting off something. Unwilling to let it go, Chris turned to Madison for help. After watching the video on the DV, Madison agreed with Travis's view. If anyone was trapped, they would surely ask the military for help. But Chris believed that they might be unwilling or unable to ask the military for help. There must be some unknown secret hidden here. So to verify everything, Madison went to the roof alone, continuously waving a flashlight. Unexpectedly, she got a response. Confused, Madison recalled that her husband had previously asked the commander, who had assured him that there were no living people outside the safe zone. Unable to curb her curiosity, she decided to go outside the safe zone herself. There were always soldiers patrolling near the iron fence, so Madison carefully avoided their line of sight and used scissors to cut the wire mesh and successfully reach the area outside. As the commander had said, there was not a single living person to be seen. The air was filled with the stench of corpses, which were scattered everywhere. But surprisingly, some of the bodies were zombies, but some were clearly just ordinary humans. Just then, a patrol suddenly appeared, and Madison quickly hid under a car to avoid being discovered. Travis's ex-wife was a nurse. Whenever she had free time, she would voluntarily provide medical help to the nearby residents. But no one expected that the medicine she injected into her patients contained a large amount of morphine. Since this neighborhood had been sealed off by the military and was lacking medical supplies to treat patients, the ex-wife had no choice but to inject them with morphine to bring them temporary peace. However, this well-intentioned act gave Nick, a drug addict, an opportunity. He had always presented himself as having quit drugs in front of his mother, but behind her back, he would sneak into patients' homes and inject the morphine-filled IV into himself to alleviate his addiction, completely disregarding the lives of the patients. However, his methods soon proved ineffective. A female doctor arrived in the safe zone. After examining the neighbor's injuries, she arranged for the neighbor's family to be transported to the military camp outside the safe zone, promising that better medical services would be provided there. The ex-wife suddenly thought of Nick and invited the doctor to come to his house for a checkup. The doctor promptly came over. She first checked Daniel's injured wife, finding her wound had become infected, and she too needed to be taken to the military camp. Daniel had a natural distrust of the military, but his wife's injury couldn't be delayed any longer, so he agreed to let the doctor take her for treatment, insisting that he join them. Subsequently, the doctor conducted a simple checkup on Nick. Despite his attempts to hide his drug addiction, the doctor had found something. As night fell, the military sent a team of soldiers to take the injured woman. When Daniel prepared to go with them, he was rejected by the soldiers. They said that they were supposed to take 2 people, one being the injured woman, but the other was Nick. It turned out that Nick's addiction hadn't escaped the doctor's examination. Everything happened so suddenly, the military hadn't communicated with anyone in advance. Madison could only watch as her son was forcibly taken away by the soldiers. Travis's ex-wife pleaded with the doctor, who replied that the hospital was short-staffed. If she really wanted to help, she could go to the hospital with her. The woman agreed because she was a nurse. As she left, she tried to say something, but Madison couldn't hear clearly through the glass, so she believed that it's Travis's ex-wife who had revealed Nick's drug addiction to the doctor, which caused her son to be taken away. Distraught, Travis had to sit on the roof for a while. Suddenly, he saw a light in a house outside the safe zone, followed by a burst of intense gunfire. The house soon fell into darkness. Travis finally understood that what the military called cleanup was intruding into homes and killing innocents. Although Daniel's injured wife and Nick were taken away by the military for better medical conditions, Daniel, distrusting the military, believes that his wife will not end well in the hands of the military. He decides that he must find a way to rescue his wife. Travis knew his concern, and early the next morning he proactively found the officer in charge of the quarantine community, expressing his wish to see the 2 people who were taken away the day before. He had often helped the military resolve conflicts with community residents before, and although the officer was a bit reluctant, he eventually agreed to his request. Under the officer's leadership, Travis drove towards the military camp. While passing through the city, Travis and his group unexpectedly encounter a zombie. The soldiers immediately disembark from the vehicle and go into battle mode. To everyone's surprise, the officer orders the sniper rifle to be given to Travis to take down the zombie. Understanding that this is a move to embarrass him, Travis doesn't back down. Under the guidance of the soldiers, he aims at the target. However, upon seeing the name tag on the zombie's chest, Travis backs out. In the end, he cannot pull the trigger and hands the opportunity back to the soldiers. Just as they are preparing to continue their journey, a distress call from another squad nearby comes through the radio, so they immediately rush to the rescue site. All the soldiers alight from the vehicle, gear up, and rush into the building, leaving Travis alone in the vehicle. After a while, the radio starts broadcasting intense gunfire and screams of soldiers. It's alarming that of the full squad that went in, only a few returned. Even their officer was killed. Travis returns to the car with a confused look. The surviving soldiers reveal that new orders have been issued from above. They have to head to a new battle zone, and they no longer plan to return to the military base. The unfortunate Travis can only disembark halfway. Luckily, it's not far from home, and he safely arrives before sundown. But the sight that greets him at home shocks him. A soldier is tightly bound to a chair. Upon inquiry, he finds out this is all the work of Daniel. It's revealed that earlier, Daniel's daughter tried to collect medicine for her injured mother and seduced a soldier using her charm. Although she didn't manage to get the medicine, the two grew close, which allowed her the opportunity to lure the soldier home, where he ended up in Daniel's hands. Initially, Daniel planned to use him as a hostage to exchange for his wife. But when the soldier revealed many unknown secrets of the military, Daniel changed his mind. According to the soldier, the military had gone all out in order to create a safe isolation zone in the zombie apocalypse, resorting to any means necessary. After clearing all the infected around the safe zone, they locked up all unconfirmed citizens in a large stadium. There were as many as thousands of people there, and unsurprisingly, they've all turned into zombies. Also, anyone in the safe zone who falls ill or gets injured is forcibly taken to a nearby military camp under the guise of providing better medical help. In reality, only injured soldiers receive actual treatment. The civilians with minor injuries are all confined in cages. As the number of detainees increases, soldiers occasionally take some people away, and it's unclear where they are being taken. This time, it's Nick's turn. Fortunately, his cellmate Strand, who was a successful salesperson but not a philanthropist, uses valuable trinkets in exchange for Nick's release. Strand had spent a hefty sum to save Nick because he believes that a daring addict like Nick is the best hope to assist him in escaping this place. However, severe patients like Daniel's wife also received some special attention. She was placed in the intensive care unit at this time. However, due to the scarcity of medical resources, her condition worsened. When Travis's ex-wife, who had been volunteering at the camp, found Daniel's wife, she had already died from sepsis. The camp's military doctor acted swiftly to prevent her from turning into a zombie after death and end her potential threat. Finally, the captured soldier revealed a shocking secret that the military was preparing to abandon the entire city of Los Angeles. All soldiers were to evacuate the area by 9 a.m. the next day. Travis and Daniel's families were not going to sit idly by. After learning the location and layout of the military camp, they gathered their supplies and prepared to rescue people before heading to the deserted desert to avoid the zombie catastrophe. Travis and his group knew that rescuing people from the camp was almost an impossible task. Then Daniel came up with a crazy plan. He approached the door of the stadium where 2,000 zombies were held. The continuous roar of the zombies inside was like beasts in a cage, but Daniel released all the zombies and led them to the nearby military camp. Although the zombies moved slowly, their sheer number was their strength. Even when the soldiers discovered something was wrong and opened fire immediately, it was of no use. More and more zombies were approaching. Soon, the entire camp was on high alert, with all the soldiers gathered at the entrance to fight back desperately. They knew that if the horde of zombies broke in, they would be doomed, but this is what Travis and his group wanted. While the military's attention was distracted, they smoothly snuck into the camp through a side entrance. The camp's military doctor had already received the retreat order from the higher-ups. Everything was packed, waiting for the transport helicopter to land and evacuate the medical equipment and wounded. However, the camp was attacked by zombies at this crucial moment. The transport helicopter simply abandoned the rescue mission and flew away. Seeing this, Travis's ex-wife, who was a nurse and volunteering at the camp, panicked. She had originally planned to rescue her ex-husband Travis and their son using this helicopter. Now, her plan was ruined, but she didn't give up hope. She used her access card to open gate after gate, quickly running toward the outside of the camp. However, when she reached the playground, she froze. Outside the camp's main gate, there was a dense crowd of zombies. Although the soldiers were still fighting bravely, casualties were starting to occur. This was like a signal for a dam breach. With the zombies relentlessly charging forward, the camp's defense finally collapsed. A massive influx of zombies poured into the camp. The soldiers, once without shelter, were like lambs to the slaughter in front of the zombies. The ex-wife watched all this and ran towards the interior of the camp. Nick and Strand, who were detained in the camp's iron cage, could hear the intense battle outside. Looking around, they realized that there were no guard soldiers in sight. They understood that their best opportunity to escape had arrived. Using the key to the main gate they had prepared beforehand, they casually walked out of the iron cage, ignoring the continuous cries for help from others. For them, every second was precious. But they were still one step too late as a large number of zombies had already broken into the camp. They had no choice but to turn around and find another way out. Before long, they found themselves at the end of a corridor, the door in front of them shut tight and zombies closing in from behind. Clearly, they were trapped. In the face of a zombie horde, any resistance was futile. Thankfully, Nick saw his father and others rushing over to rescue them from the other end of the door, but he discovered that the door was incredibly sturdy. Suddenly, the ex-wife dashed forward, pulled out her access card, and unlocked the door. Only then could Nick and Strand escape. The two groups finally merged, but they had no time to exchange pleasantries, let alone hormones. They had to run towards the depths of the camp. As they passed the kitchen, they were attacked by a group of zombies. Luckily, they were no longer novices. They picked up weapons and started fighting the zombies. In no time, they had killed the wave of zombies. Afterwards, Travis and his group managed to escape from the back door of the camp. Here, they saw mountains of bodies and ashes. By this time, Daniel had learned of his wife's death from Travis's ex-wife. Seeing the ashes of the bodies that had been set on fire, Daniel couldn't help but feel more sorrowful, thinking that one of them might be his wife. Soon, everyone arrived at the parking lot. Just as they were preparing to get in the car and leave, a figure holding a handgun suddenly appeared. It was the captured soldier. Previously, after getting enough information from him, Daniel planned to kill him, but Travis had secretly let him go. Unexpectedly, the soldier harbored deep resentment and had been lying in wait to seek revenge. Without saying a word, he fired a shot and hit Daniel's daughter. Travis, quick to react, tackled him to the ground and began to beat him. He was the most angry at this point, regretting his moment of kindness that had let a thankless person go free. Fortunately, the girl's injury was not fatal. Finally, Travis and his group were led by Strand to an excellent refuge. This place was located by the sea, not only far from the city, but also abundant in supplies. Everyone was satisfied with this place and even planned to settle down here. But Strand began packing his bags. It turned out that this place was not the final destination. The real refuge in his mind was a large yacht in the middle of the ocean. But unexpectedly, Travis's ex-wife had unfortunately been scratched by a zombie during their escape. In the end, at her persistent request, Travis had to shoot her himself, ending her ex-life. In fact, Strand had arranged a luxurious yacht early on as a sanctuary. To the survivors, it was like the Ark of Noah in the apocalypse. Just as they were prepared to board on the eve, the seaside villa fell to the zombies. Travis and his companions were held up on the beach by relentless waves of zombies. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Nick arrived with a Tesla speedboat. They quickly boarded the Tesla speedboat before it lost all its battery, leaving behind the persistent zombies, and managed to board the yacht without any mishaps. By this time, the military had begun aerial strikes, intending to burn both the zombies and themselves. The city instantly turned into a sea of flames. Standing on the yacht, Travis and his group silently watched their homeland, feeling a mix of relief and melancholy. But life must go on. They welcomed a new day at sea, enjoying the sea breeze and the waves in seeming comfort. The yacht was well stocked and even had a freshwater system, able to meet their daily needs. On Strand's suggestion, they were preparing to leave the United States and start a new life in Santiago. However, they soon encountered an emergency situation. A lifeboat carrying dozens of survivors was calling for help. If they didn't help, these people would surely die. Madison was anxious and ran to find Strand to initiate a rescue. Strand assumed the role of captain. He saw the refugees, but instead of approaching, he decisively accelerated away from them. Given the circumstances, Strand's decision might not have been wrong. Welcoming so many people on board would increase the risk of resource scarcity and virus spread. Alicia had unknowingly made contact with a man over the radio, a fellow survivor drifting at sea. Their conversations became more frequent, and they gradually warmed up to each other. Suddenly one day, the man on the radio told Alicia that their ship was taking on water and they would not hold out much longer. Without giving it a second thought, Alicia planned to go and rescue them. They exchanged their positions using a volcanic island as reference. When she went to tell Strand about the situation, he was furious after hearing it. In these circumstances, revealing their location was a foolish act. If the other party were bandits, the consequences would be unimaginable. He reaffirmed in front of everyone that he had the final say on the yacht, then walked off. Alicia was very upset and told her radio friend that she couldn't save him. Unexpectedly, he replied they would be meeting soon. Suddenly, Strand seemed to have discovered something on the radar, his face tense. Meanwhile, Nick was swimming joyfully in the sea when he noticed a shadow overhead. Looking closely, it turned out to be a terrifying zombie. Choking on water in his fright, Nick managed to escape the zombie due to his good swimming skills. When he surfaced, he saw a massive sunken ship with debris emerging from the fog and floating all around. The zombie he had just encountered must have come from that ship. Intrigued, Nick swam towards the sunken ship. There, he discovered bullet holes all over the ship's bottom, indicating that it had been forcibly sunk. He also found a ship's log wrapped in tape. As he picked it up, another zombie appeared, but it seemed to be trapped, unable to move freely. Relieved, Nick brought the ship's log to the surface where his father was waiting in a lifeboat. They managed to board the yacht successfully. Upon opening the ship's log, they discovered the sunken ship had come from the south, passing through cities all overrun by zombies, including their intended destination, Santiago. But before they could lament their situation, the radar showed a ship was quickly approaching their yacht. Strand accelerated the yacht, but the other party was persistent. He suspected that they could be the people Alicia had contacted over the radio, who were now harboring ill intentions. The sunken ship they had just found might have been sunk by their heavy weaponry. Strand became anxious, pulled out a map, and after some pondering, decided to steer to a nearby bay to turn off the engines and dock, hoping to evade their pursuers. There was a checkpoint at the entrance of the bay where they might find some supplies. As they were preparing to land, they suddenly noticed that a light was on in a house not far away. It was surprising to find that there were still people living in this area. Travis couldn't help but feel a surge of spirits, quickly leading his family towards the house. Meanwhile, Strand and Daniel stayed on the yacht to provide backup. To ease the homeowner's concerns, Travis explained that he simply wanted to exchange information to set a course for their upcoming voyage. This approach proved to be effective, and it wasn't long before Travis and his family were invited inside. The house owner was named George, who seemed like a polite scholar, and he hit it off with Travis. He also shared many useful pieces of information, saying that most American cities had fallen and even the borders were closed to entry and exit. It was becoming difficult to find a place of refuge. However, as their conversation deepened, Travis realized that George was a typical doomsday theorist. He believed that the zombie virus was a natural cleansing by Mother Nature, an inevitable event. So he had moved his family to this secluded island early on. Travis was stunned by this revelation. But that wasn't all. Under the influence of George's thinking, his children also showed significant differences from others. His youngest son had blood holes on the foreheads of all his humanoid toys, a method George taught them to deal with infected individuals. And the eldest son was even more ruthless. To ensure absolute safety on the island, the family had surrounded it with barbed wire, keeping the zombies that the waves washed up at bay. The eldest son's main task each day was to dispose of these zombies. His skilled movements were as easy as slicing pieces of shit without a trace of emotion on his face. Chris happened to come across this and started imitating the act of killing zombies. Unable to watch this, Travis felt it was a morbid behavior, but didn't confront the issue directly. Instead, he turned to George to discuss the matter, only to find George thought it was perfectly normal and even asked Travis to help repair the damaged fence. This made Travis feel even more that something was off with George's family. Fortunately, George's wife seemed normal. While picking vegetables in the morning, she suddenly pleaded with Madison to take her 2 young children away, to prevent them from becoming twisted under George's influence. The plan had to be kept secret from George because he would never allow his children to leave his side, believing that the family would rather die together. Madison was persuaded and quickly began to devise a plan with her husband. At first, Travis was reluctant. He didn't believe George's wife's story at all. At that moment, Nick appeared, clearly panicked. He had just been in George's daughter's room and found a packet of poison. It didn't take much to realize that George had prepared it for his family's collective suicide. Travis came to grasp the true extent of George's psychological distortion and finally agreed to Madison's request. They returned to George's home, where his wife had already packed the children's bags. Just as she was about to call the children to leave, George unexpectedly came home. Seeing the luggage in his wife's hands, he realized what was happening and started to question her. Just then, their young son came downstairs, saying something was wrong with his sister. George and his wife ran upstairs to find their daughter lying on the floor with pills scattered around her, showing that she had accidentally ingested the poison. George's wife clutched their daughter to her chest and angrily pushed her husband away, not realizing that her daughter had already turned into a zombie and bit her on the neck. George, too, understood what had happened. As if coming to a realization, he begged Travis to take his young son away, then sat down in utter despair. Travis quickly took George's young son onto the yacht, where Strand started to question why they were bringing more people aboard. Suddenly, George's eldest son appeared with a rifle. He was as stubborn as his father, believing that family should not be separated. But he wasn't aware that his father had changed his mind in his final moments. Madison and the others couldn't persuade him, and they could only watch helplessly as he took his younger brother away from the yacht. As soon as the brothers disembarked, they encountered their mother, who had turned into a zombie. The eldest told his brother to turn away, waved goodbye to Madison on the boat, and then with the rifle, he ended his mother's life. Everyone on the yacht watched in silence at the unfolding tragedy. After that, they managed to shake off a group of pursuers when their yacht malfunctioned. Travis found that the cooling system's intake was blocked by zombies. It would take a whole day to clean it out, so the yacht had to wait in place. Madison noticed many pieces of luggage scattered on a nearby island. They figured it would be better to go ashore and collect some useful items than to wait aimlessly. Daniel took Nick and others in a rubber dinghy to the island. They looked around curiously, finding luggage and metal debris everywhere, likely from a plane crash. However, Daniel was puzzled by the scarcity of bodies on the ground. After cautioning Nick and the others to be careful, they split up to collect supplies, with antibiotics being their priority target. Chris wandered farther away and stumbled upon the remains of a crashed plane. Curiosity got the better of him, and he ducked into the fuselage. Inside, there was an abundance of luggage, and not a few of the passengers had turned into zombies. However, they were all bound up, almost completely unable to move. Chris made short work of the trapped zombies. As he was clearing them, a man in one of the seats suddenly woke up. He hadn't turned, he was just badly injured. Crying out for help at the sight of Chris, the man was gently laid down by Chris, who then noticed a ghastly wound on the man's back. Knowing that such an injury was beyond help in these conditions, Chris stayed silent for a while before he swung his metal weapon down. Daniel, not far away, realized he hadn't seen Chris for some time and began to search for him urgently, but to no avail. Anxiety set in until he saw a figure running towards him in the distance, followed by an endless horde of zombies. It turned out that the passengers of the crashed plane were all here. Meanwhile, Nick heard a noise not too far away. On closer inspection, he found a zombie half buried in the ground and covered in crabs. Cursing under his breath, he accidentally slipped, tumbling down and landing right next to the zombie. A frantic struggle ensued, but Nick had a dagger on him and managed to end the fight by plunging it into the zombie's head. But just then, another zombie rolled down towards him. Daniel was desperately firing at the approaching zombies, but they were too numerous, and he had to keep shooting while retreating. Luckily, upon hearing the gunshots, Chris ran over to join him. However, now Nick was nowhere to be seen. Daniel and the others couldn't leave him behind, so they engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the zombies. They managed quite well at first due to the slow movement of the zombies, but as time passed, they became surrounded, with nowhere to retreat. At that critical moment, a man from within the zombie crowd suddenly sprang up and began taking down the surrounding zombies. It was Nick who had hurriedly joined them. Seeing this, Daniel and the others ran through the gap that was made. Nick had cleverly covered himself in zombie blood to mask his scent from them. Once reunited, the group pushed the rubber dinghy into the sea and set off towards the yacht. Madison and the others were also aware of the situation on the island, keeping a nervous watch. Trailing behind the dinghy, there was a lifeboat carrying the girl who had led the zombies to them. She was accompanied by an injured companion. Strand, who was usually against allowing strangers on board, was even less inclined to do so with the injured. Alicia, seeing his cold-heartedness, vehemently protested. Travis came up with a compromise. They would tow them with the yacht and provide food and water, a sort of physical quarantine. As Travis had just repaired the yacht, Strand could not persist with his objections and left with a dark expression. The girl, however, was ungrateful for the arrangement, and even resentful. Madison and the others felt the solution was too cruel, but Strand remained convinced he was right. When Travis left, Strand went straight to the stern and unbelievably cut the rope towing the girl's boat. Madison watched Strand with venom in her eyes, imagining throwing him into the sea, but she eventually calmed her impulses, realizing they still needed him for the journey ahead. Strand's original destination, Santiago, was overrun by zombies, so they had to change plans and head for another refuge mentioned by Strand on the Baja Peninsula in Mexico, which was well stocked and surrounded by strong walls. At night, the yacht was moored in the middle of the sea, ready to continue sailing at dawn. Chris and Daniel's daughter were chatting on deck, but they suddenly spotted a lifeboat approaching with 3 people on board, about to board the yacht. Chris, gun in hand, hesitated whether to stop them, calling out in urgency. Travis and the others quickly arrived on deck. Upon spotting a pregnant woman among the 3, they dismissed their doubts and welcomed them aboard. A man claimed their boat had been damaged, and they had barely escaped on the lifeboat. Alicia suddenly recognized his voice as that of the man she had previously contacted via radio and identified him as Jake. When Jake's identity was revealed, he suddenly turned violent, catching Travis and the others off guard and taking them hostage. Strand's suspicion was correct. They were pirates posing as survivors. Watching everything from upstairs, Strand quickly grabbed the submachine gun hidden in a cabinet, only to find it damaged and unusable. With no other choice, Strand discreetly escaped on the lifeboat. However, Jake and his pirates were familiar with everyone on the boat, and after counting the people and noticing Strand and Nick were missing, they rushed to the deck and spotted the fleeing Strand. Decisive, they shot at the lifeboat, knowing that even if they missed, the boat would eventually break and sink. Poor Strand drifted at sea all night, his satellite phone damaged by water, cutting off his hope of contacting his connection named Thomas, a wealthy man who had set up the Baja Refuge. Strand had met Thomas in a bar and they quickly became close. Thankfully, before escaping, Strand had Nick jump ship and swim to a nearby coastline, previously a refuge but now abandoned due to a zombie breach. On the other side, Nick, well suited for surviving the apocalypse, calmly lured a nearby zombie, killed it, and used its blood to disguise himself, a trick he had discovered by accident. Following the address Strand left, he soon reached a villa meant for their rendezvous, where Thomas's bodyguard was waiting to take Strand to the Baja Refuge. After Nick identified himself, the two set off to meet with Strand at the yacht, unaware that Strand had already jumped into the sea, his fate unknown, taking the keys to the yacht with him. At this point, the hijackers wanted to take the yacht back to their base and could only force Travis to start the engine by threatening the lives of his wife and children. Travis had no choice but to comply. They began to connect the circuits, but he managed to retain a trick up his sleeve. As they passed the hall where Daniel was, he secretly slipped the crowbar he had into the couch. Seeing this, Daniel started to exert his strength, continuously rubbing the rope around his hands. At that moment, only one pregnant hijacker was watching them, so the hope of escape was significant. But their luck ran out just as Daniel was about to make his move. Another speedboat drew near. The newcomer was the leader of the hijackers, a disciplined and organized gang. The boss was well aware of Travis and his company and specifically requested Alicia and Travis to be taken back to the base first. Jake and the pregnant woman left with them, leaving a few men to take Daniel and the others ashore on the yacht before returning to the base. This was an agreement Alicia had previously made with Jake to trade her safety for her family's. After the leader and his men left, the leader's brother, who stayed behind, had a change of heart. He didn't want Daniel and the others to leave alive and was preparing to eliminate them to avoid future problems. Right at that moment, another speedboat arrived. It was Nick and Thomas's bodyguard, an excellent marksman who killed 2 men with several precise shots. At that time, Madison and the rest in the cabin also rose up, overpowering the last hijacker, the boss's brother. After the bodyguard boarded the yacht, he discovered that Strand was not present and stated that without Strand, no one could cross the Mexican border. At that moment, Strand's lifeboat had sunk and he was soaked in the water, almost unconscious. Fortunately, Madison suddenly appeared and rescued him. Madison's husband and daughter had been kidnapped by a group of hijackers, but luckily she and her teammates had also captured the hijacker leader's brother. Daniel learned the specifics of the hijackers from the captive. There were a total of 13 hijackers with 3 boats specializing in robbing passing ships for supplies. After finishing the interrogation, Daniel was about to leave when Chris volunteered to stay behind to guard the captive. He was feeling guilty because it was his failure to shoot the previous night that had allowed the hijackers aboard, and now he wanted to make amends. Daniel informed everyone of the hijackers' situation, and after hearing this, Madison immediately turned the boat around, having devised a plan to exchange the captive for her husband Travis and daughter Alicia. Strand, just pulled from the sea, was lying weakly on the bed. No longer as ruthless as before, he agreed with Madison's decision to use the captive as a bargaining chip, as a way to repay her for saving him. Madison's plan went smoothly, and soon she was able to contact the hijackers' leader via radio, who agreed to the exchange, but demanded that only one person come ashore for the trade. Everything was ready, and they were just waiting to approach the hijackers' base when suddenly there was a gunshot from upstairs. Everyone ran to check and found that Chris had shot the captive hijacker after being verbally provoked, which deeply hurt his feelings. Now, the plan to exchange hostages was ruined, leaving everyone speechless. The dead hijacker quickly turned into a zombie, but Daniel quickly nailed it to the wall. Observing the zombie's flailing limbs, an idea struck Daniel. He tied the zombie's hands and put a hood on its head, making it difficult to distinguish between a living person and a zombie. They hoped it could pass off as a human. Madison decided to take the risk, and as the yacht neared the shore, she launched the speedboat with the zombified captive towards the hijacker's base. The captured Travis was now locked in a cage. He had been perplexed as to why the hijackers had specifically targeted him until a woman appeared, and suddenly it all made sense. This was the very girl Strand had once coldly abandoned after cutting the rope that bound them. It turns out the girl had survived the ordeal at sea and had been rescued by the hijackers. Initially, Travis had suggested using the rope to keep her with them for her protection, but she took no gratitude from that and provided all their information to the hijackers' leader. Her only condition was for them to capture Travis for her. Thankfully, Travis appealed to her emotions and reasoned with her, causing her to refrain from harming him further and walk away. Meanwhile, Alicia and her father had both been taken by the hijackers. While her father was confined in an iron cage, she was allowed to roam freely on the large ship. The hijackers' leader even cooked a delicious steak for her, and Jake accompanied her throughout, explaining the operations of their organization. It appeared that the hijackers were genuinely trying to recruit Alicia, and Jake indeed had real feelings for her. However, Alicia soon sensed something was wrong. She noticed on the radar that Strand's yacht was approaching the base too quickly for a simple drop-off and return. Under her pressing, Jake finally revealed that all the survivors from the previously captured boats had been killed by the leader's brother. Upon hearing this, Alicia urgently shouted her desire to leave. Jake, seeing her distress, didn't hesitate to agree to escape with her. At that moment, Madison finally arrived on shore with the hostage, and the leader arrived as promised with Travis. The exchange went surprisingly smoothly, and the hostages quickly returned to their respective sides. Little did the leader know that his brother had turned into a zombie and unexpectedly bit him on the arm, affecting his sidekick as well. The remaining hijacker was quickly subdued by Travis, who had been freed from his ropes. The couple were finally reunited, but their mission was only halfway complete, since Alicia was still in the hijackers' clutches. Fortunately, they soon found her on the deck of an abandoned ship. Alicia had not fallen for Jake's sweet nothings this time and had hidden herself away. After shaking him off, she rushed to the ship's deck, where she saw her parents nearby. Ignoring Jake's desperate attempts to keep her sexy body, Alicia jumped without hesitation and reunited with her parents. Travis and his family had once again narrowly escaped danger. Now, they were only one checkpoint away from their destination, the Baja Peninsula shelter. They had to cross the Mexican border defense line. Although Strand had previously bribed a border official, the boat had taken on many more people. For safety's sake, they had Travis and the others hide in the cabin while Strand and Thomas's bodyguards stayed on deck to negotiate with the border guards. The border guards demanded a large sum of money as a toll. Eventually, the argument escalated into cursing and even a few gunshots were heard. Travis and the others rushed up to see what had happened, finding 2 border guards shot and the bodyguards severely wounded. Upon seeing this, Daniel hurried to stab the bodies to prevent them from turning into zombies. When it was the bodyguards' turn, Nick intervened, stopping them. Unexpectedly, the other border guards ceased their attack after a few rounds of gunfire at the yacht and then slowly withdrew. Strand and the others were puzzled but made it across the border and onto the Baja Peninsula with ease. The sight of bodies strewn along the shore erased their doubts. It turns out the zombies had ravaged inside Mexico and the border defenses had naturally slackened. The group first headed to Thomas's residence, only to find it overrun with zombies. Strand was concerned and searched tirelessly. Suddenly, a large horde of zombies appeared and the group grabbed weapons to fight. They had plenty of experience dealing with zombies, and since the creatures moved slowly, they weren't too strong to handle. However, Madison was caught off guard and pinned down by a nasty zombie who wanted to have a zombie baby with her. Chris saw this, but did nothing to help. Fortunately, Alicia acted in time to save her mother from the zombie rape. The group quickly got into a car and headed straight for the shelter. The so-called shelter was actually a large manor, surrounded by sturdy walls and filled with a variety of fruits and vegetables, and even wind power for electricity. It was completely self-sufficient. Travis and his group finally had a place to settle down and relax. They were guided by the servants and let down their guard, handing over their weapons. Strand, eager to see the inside of the manor, followed the butler and finally met the contact, his close friend Thomas, who looked very ill, recently bitten by a zombie. Strand knew Thomas was awaiting his death and he was filled with sorrow. Meanwhile, Chris felt uneasy. His previous inaction in saving Madison had been noticed by Alicia, who now held a grudge. Chris tried to explain himself, but Alicia took his words seriously. Losing his patience, Chris resorted to threatening her to keep quiet about the incident. To his surprise, Alicia was intimidated and even afraid to sleep alone. When Madison noticed her daughter's unusual behavior and learned the truth, she confronted Travis about it. However, Travis believed in guiding his child rather than punishing him severely. The couple ended up sleeping separately that night due to their disagreement. The manor itself had an eerie feeling to the newcomers. With the original owner, Thomas, bedridden with illness, all affairs were now managed by the housekeeper, who was also the bodyguard's biological mother. When she learned of her son's death, she did not appear sad, but rather relieved. Daniel had sensed something was off about her. That night, he sneaked around the manor and soon discovered something amiss, a little boy muttering to himself in a room. Following him, Daniel stumbled upon an underground dungeon filled with zombies, which sent chills down his spine. He quickly retreated and confronted the housekeeper, only to realize she was a complete psychopath. She believed zombies were just another form of human existence, not the monsters others saw them as. Thus, whenever someone in the manor became seriously ill, she would poison them to death, turning them into zombies. That very night, she had prepared 2 poison pills for Thomas, intending to cleanse him and entrust Strand with administering the final ritual, allowing Thomas to continue life in another form. Strand looked at Thomas with affection, his eyes filled with sadness. In the dead of night, Chris crept out while Travis was sound asleep like a pig. In a blink, he found himself at Madison and Alicia's room. While they were also deep in slumber, he picked up a dagger from the table. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Madison and Alicia woke up immediately, screaming in terror at the sight of Chris standing by the bed with the dagger in hand. Chris hadn't expected to flee the room in such a disgraceful manner. It turned out that the gunshot had been fired by Strand, who hadn't fed Thomas the poison. Instead, he shot Thomas in the head, thinking it wouldn't allow his dear friend to rest in peace. This enraged the housekeeper, who gave Strand 1 day to bury the dead before he and his group would have to leave the manor. Madison had to come to terms with this reality, although everyone was reluctant to continue their nomadic existence. Seeing all this, Nick decided to do something for his family. He brought back the housekeeper's son, the bodyguard, who had turned into a zombie on the cruise ship. The housekeeper was moved by the sight of her zombified child and appreciated Nick, inviting him to stay. But Nick couldn't bear to leave his family, and only after ensuring they would not harm anyone did the housekeeper reluctantly agree to let Nick's family stay. However, Strand had to leave. Madison felt a bit relieved knowing this, but was still worried about the absent Travis. Nick decided to go out again to bring back his father. The previous night, after Chris was discovered in Madison's room, he ran out of the manor alone. As a father, Travis had no choice but to search through the night until dawn when he found Chris in a cabin. But Chris was resistant and even held a child hostage, telling Travis to leave him alone. Travis, enraged, slapped the gun out of his hand. Chris tried to run away but was caught by his father. Feeling abnormal, Chris refused to return to the manor to face everyone. When Nick finally found Travis, he was surprised to learn that he had decided to stay with Chris, temporarily not returning to the manor. Knowing further discussion was futile, Nick bade farewell to his father. Since Daniel discovered the peculiar nature of the manor, he became increasingly paranoid. At every opportunity, he wanted to take his daughter and flee this wicked place. In a conflict with the manor's guards, he surprisingly became violent and injured someone. Consequently, he was placed under confinement. His daughter wished to visit him but was always fobbed off with various excuses. The housekeeper used to be a devout believer and was quite skilled in persuading others. She urged Daniel to repent and confess his sins. Although Daniel appeared strong on the surface, the sins he had committed often haunted him when he was alone, especially his inability to properly lay his deceased wife to rest, which left him in constant unease. After being lectured by the housekeeper, his guilt seemed to intensify. That evening, seizing the moment when the guard was feeding him, Daniel knocked the guard out. Visions of his wife appeared before him, reminding him to ensure their daughter's safety and to seek his own release. Daniel walked out with a smile on his face. Madison soon sensed something off with the housekeeper as well, and felt that her son Nick had become sullen since meeting her. Determined to rescue her son, Madison approached the housekeeper, pretending to want to understand Nick better. She then led Madison to where the zombies were confined. The housekeeper believed that zombies, like young children who can't speak and are constantly looking for food when hungry, should be cared for by a mother. As she became more engrossed in her beliefs, she did not notice Madison slipping out of the room. By the time she realized, Madison had already locked the iron door, leaving her trapped with the zombies. Poor Strand, under the watch of the guards, silently left the manor. Of all his former friends, only Alicia came to see him off. Strand looked utterly forlorn. Daniel, who had just escaped, did not leave, but instead crept into the room where the zombies were confined, spilling gasoline on the floor as he went. He seemed to perceive the zombies as they were in life, understanding that their souls had not been truly liberated, just like his wife. Daniel, lost in the illusion and encouraged by his wife's apparition, smiled and lit the gasoline, burying himself and the zombies in a sea of flames, perhaps finding his own release at last. The manor was engulfed by the raging fire. Nick saw it from afar and ran towards it. Strand had left not long ago and noticed the fire, quickly changing direction. He soon encountered Madison and others as hordes of zombies were approaching. Although not everyone had arrived, they had no choice but to hurry into the car. Madison glanced around and just spotted her son, who seemed like a changed person. Upon learning of the manor's destruction and his family's involvement, Nick turned away in disappointment, ignoring his mother's loud calls and walking towards the advancing zombie horde. With strands pulling and dragging, Madison barely managed to get into the car. As the vehicle started, they passed by Nick. Perhaps to Nick, his family seemed more terrifying than the zombies themselves. The entire manor and dozens of lives were reduced to ashes, leaving only a maid and a child behind. Nick intended to find a place that did not view zombies as monsters and was free of deceit. After learning from the maid that there might still be human settlements in the northern towns, Nick set off alone on his quest for this dream. Heading north along the highway, he covered his body in blood to avoid zombie harm. Little did he know, no amount of camouflage could protect him from human attacks. That night, Nick found a house to stay in, only to discover it was already occupied by a mother and her child. Protective as a hen with her chicks, the mother chased Nick away with a stick, leaving him in a state of disarray. In the hurry, he didn't even have a chance to grab his bags. This poor boy, in search of a peaceful haven amid a zombie apocalypse, had to keep moving, scavenging for supplies as he went. While he could handle zombies with ease, an encounter with deceitful humans meant nothing but a frantic escape for Nick. In the desolate wilderness, he even had to resort to drinking his own urine to stay hydrated. Come morning, Nick was startled awake by two ferocious dogs. He managed to scramble atop an abandoned car, narrowly escaping a gruesome fate, but not without sustaining a terrible wound on his leg. As he watched the dogs unwilling to leave, a sense of despair washed over him. Suddenly, a horde of zombies approached, and the vicious dogs were quickly overpowered and devoured. Nick felt as if the zombies had come to his rescue. After a long thought and a makeshift bandage on his wound, he blended into the horde and walked with them into the unknown. For some reason, he felt safer among them. In a daze, he even thought he heard the zombies speaking. Nick followed the wandering dead, not knowing for how long, until he encountered the same bandits as before. This time, he didn't have to run away. He charged forward with the zombies, and in moments, the assailants were overwhelmed. The sole survivor fled in a car. Once again, Nick felt the safety that came with the zombie crowd, oblivious to the fact that another group of armed people had set their sights on him. But he had no strength to worry about that. Dehydrated and exhausted, Nick finally passed out. By a stroke of fortune, a timely downpour revived him. He made his way to a town, deserted but still stocked with supplies, where he could tend to his wounds. As he was bandaging his wound, a group of armed individuals burst in. They were the same ones who had observed Nick from a distance. After confirming his injury wasn't caused by zombies, they took him to a clinic. Nick's foot was soon treated, and when he stepped out of the clinic, his entire mood lifted. He had stumbled upon a bustling market. Adults were busy with their errands, children were playing joyfully, and the air was filled with the essence of life. Nick felt that he had finally found the place he had longed for. Nick hadn't experienced such a scene in a long time, and it filled him with joy. Unexpectedly, when he woke up the next day, the entire community had disappeared. Nick started to panic and looked around. It wasn't long before he heard a faint crying sound. He followed it and found a little girl crying and calling for her dad, staring into the distance. Nick looked where the girl was looking and saw the community's people gathered behind a chain-link fence, just a single barrier away from a massive horde of zombies. Lucy, the woman who had saved Nick, embraced a man in front of her. With a face full of despair, the man walked through the fence and into the zombies alone. The residents murmured as they watched the man being devoured. Afterwards, the community returned to its bustling state. Nick learned from the residents that those on the brink of death would choose self-sacrifice, becoming zombies to continue protecting their loved ones behind the fence. The community's actual leader, the doctor who had treated Nick's wound, was rumored to have been bitten by a zombie, but miraculously survived. Under his influence, the residents weren't afraid of the zombie world, believing it to be nature's way of self-repair, and anticipated a new world after the zombies departed. Nick realized that this place wasn't as perfect as he had imagined. Even the drinking water wasn't as clean as his own bandages. It seemed the community also faced a shortage of resources. Periodically, they would go to a large supermarket now controlled by a gang. Lucy would trade surplus medicine for essential supplies. Nick casually picked up a bag of snacks, but Lucy gave him a look which made him obediently put it back. At the end of the aisle, Nick noticed the gang members' families living there, and the gang boss's sister appeared to be severely ill. It was clear they had their own problems. As they prepared to leave with a cart full of supplies, Nick was suddenly tackled to the ground. He had secretly taken a bag of snacks and hidden it on himself. The gang boss became furious, drawing out a machete and ready to chop off Nick's hands. Facing death, Nick stayed calm and threatened him. As an experienced junkie, Nick could tell that the boss's sister was addicted to drugs. He bluffed that if he died, they would have no more drug trades and his sister wouldn't get her fix. The negotiation was successful. Not only did Nick save his limbs, but he also managed to get an extra cart of supplies from the gang. Back in the community, Nick gave the stolen snacks to the little girl. He did all of this just to comfort her who had just lost her father. On the other side, Madison and her group spent 2 whole days searching for Travis without success. With supplies and their vehicle running low, they decided to return to their yacht. However, when they reached the seaside, they were completely baffled. The yacht that had been moored at the shore was nowhere to be found. With no other options, they headed north, aiming to find a safe place to stay. They soon arrived at a hotel, and after careful observation that revealed no signs of zombies, they decided to take a risk and go inside to check it out. Strand pressed the service bell at the front desk, but it didn't attract any zombies, indicating that the hotel was temporarily safe. The empty dining room had nothing left but some alcohol. Alicia, against her mother's objections, insisted on searching other rooms for supplies with her companion. Left behind, Madison and Strand sat down and drank the alcohol. They became tipsy. Madison, in a moment of recklessness, slammed her wine glass while Strand played the piano enthusiastically. The noise they made soon attracted zombies. Some of the more impatient zombies even started taking shortcuts. They flooded into the hotel lobby like a tide. Madison and Strand realized the danger too late, and when they tried to escape, they were already surrounded by zombies. Strand kept swinging his weapon, trying to fend off the climbing zombies. Madison, knowing they couldn't keep this up for long, remembered a method Nick had used before. She killed a zombie and smeared its blood on herself as a disguise, and this trick actually worked. They managed to escape the lobby, climbing up an exterior ladder to a detached suite. After a quick search that revealed no zombies, they finally relaxed. However, Madison was still worried about her daughter's safety and wondered how she was doing. Just a short while ago, Alicia and her companion, who had gone out to search for supplies, had found a lot of food in one of the guest rooms. But after taking a bath, Alicia came out of the bathroom to find her companion missing. At that moment, she faintly heard piano music from not far away and was about to go to the balcony to investigate when a figure suddenly fell from the sky. It turned out that zombies, attracted by the piano sound, had all come to the balcony. Right then, zombies were rapidly falling from various balconies, and to make matters worse, the fallen zombies were not dead. They got up and continued towards the hotel lobby. Realizing the hotel was no longer safe, Alicia wanted to notify Madison and the others, but the staircase was already overrun with zombies. Alicia had to return to the room, and from the peephole, she saw a continuous stream of zombies passing by. She knew that going out now would be akin to suicide, so she waited until nightfall. After wrestling with the decision, Alicia decided to take a chance. But as soon as she stepped out of her room, she was targeted by a large group of zombies and quickly driven to the end of the hallway. Driven by a survival instinct, Alicia forcibly pried open the elevator doors and leapt to grab the cable inside. The zombies following her fell down one after another, but Alicia couldn't hold on for long. She had to muster all her strength to climb up. Just as she was about to exhaust her energy, a woman appeared and pulled her up. This woman named Elena was the hotel's manager and had keys that could access all the rooms and corridors. She had been hiding in a hotel room with her nephew until he went out to look for food a couple of days ago and never returned. Elena suspected that he had been captured by another group in the hotel. Alicia persuaded Elena to help her reunite with her mother first, reasoning that with more people, it would be easier to look for Elena's nephew afterward. Now, their first task was to deal with the zombies in the corridor. Alicia lured all the zombies into a guest room, after which the hiding Elena immediately locked the door. Alicia then escaped by climbing over the balcony to the adjacent room, effectively solving the problem of a whole corridor of zombies in an instant. The two quickly made it to the hotel lobby, only to find it deserted with no sign of Madison. Just as they were about to leave, they were suddenly confronted by a group of people holding Elena's nephew hostage. The group looked menacing, as if they harbored deep resentment. It turned out that they had a grudge with Elena and her nephew from a month ago. They were having a wedding in the hotel, which was going well until the bride's father suddenly died and turned into a zombie, infecting the bride during an attempt to save him. A happy wedding turned into a hellish scene in an instant. In the face of the chaos, the hotel manager Elena, to prevent the unrest from spreading throughout the hotel, had locked the banquet hall doors. She did not expect that so many wedding survivors would seek them out now, demanding Elena's master key in exchange for her nephew. Pressured by the situation, Elena reluctantly agreed. As soon as the trade was completed, Alicia opened the banquet hall doors, letting the zombies stream out, and the survivors fled. Alicia and Elena then took cover in the basement. Annoyingly, the only door leading outside was unexpectedly closed. Just as Alicia was losing hope, the door opened, and it was her mother who opened it. Mother and daughter were finally reunited. Meanwhile, Travis, although he had found his runaway son Chris, had lost contact with Madison and the others. To facilitate travel, he decided to find a replacement vehicle. As he was trying to start it, Chris spotted a convenience store nearby. Despite his father's objections, he insisted on finding some food to bring back. In the store, Chris faintly heard someone talking in a room. As he was about to leave with the food, several zombies rushed in. Armed with a knife, Chris fought fiercely, saving a man who seemed to be associated with the people in the room. Unaware of the situation, Travis thought the store was overrun by zombies and hurriedly drove away with Chris, driving from day into night until the car ran out of gas. The father and son had to spend the night outdoors. At that moment, a car slowly approached. It was the people Chris had encountered at the convenience store. The leading man, named Brandon, was not only well-intentioned but also willing to share supplies with the father and son. He admired Chris's fighting abilities and proposed they travel together. However, Travis was hesitant, as he did not know the others well. He decided to ride with them until the next town, and then part ways. Midway, they encountered a farm and found a lot of chickens in the warehouse. Chris and the group were excited and prepared to catch some chickens to taste. As Travis tried to stop them, the farmer suddenly appeared with a gun, intending to drive them away. Brandon refused to back down, leading to a standoff. Travis wanted to persuade everyone to leave, as it was someone else's property, but Brandon and the others did not listen. One of them even twisted a chicken's neck to provoke the farmer, who shot him in the leg in anger. Another gunshot followed, and the farmer fell to the ground, unexpectedly shot by Chris. Seeing his son unable to distinguish right from wrong and killing indiscriminately, Travis was distraught. Back to Madison's, she helped her daughter and others escape from a tight spot. The hotel manager, Elena, informed everyone that there were still plenty of supplies left, enough to last for several months. However, the master key to all the rooms was in the hands of another group of survivors, so they needed to persuade those to let them stay in the hotel. With this in mind, Madison and Strand went to negotiate with the group. The leader, a man named Oscar, was the groom from the wedding that turned tragic. Upon reaching their room, Madison got straight to the point, urging everyone to unite to clear out the zombies trapped in the hotel, thus eliminating a potential threat. This would allow them to focus on safeguarding the hotel, or else it might be overtaken by outsiders, not all of whom would be as friendly as their group. Oscar agreed with her after listening, but a middle-aged woman sitting on the sofa was resistant. She was the mother of the deceased bride and irrationally blamed Elena for her daughter's death, insisting that Elena be expelled from the hotel. Madison disagreed, stating that now was not the time for settling personal vendettas. Every additional person was an extra hand against the zombies. Eventually, Oscar was persuaded by Madison to cooperate. Everyone took on their roles, killing the zombies room by room and dragging the bodies to the beach to be burned. This method was safe but inefficient. Clearing out all the zombies in the hotel would take a significant amount of time. Alicia saw the warning sign on the beach about dangerous currents and the prohibition against swimming, so she came up with an idea, suggesting that they could lure the horde of zombies onto the wooden bridge by the sea and find a way to make them fall into the water to be swept away by the strong currents. While this method would save time and effort, it significantly increased the risk. Someone would have to take on the responsibility of leading the horde onto the bridge. Madison volunteered for the task. Initially, Alicia wanted to do it herself, but was rejected by her mother. The group split up to create noise and lure the zombies out of their rooms, meeting up in the lobby. After successfully gathering the zombies, it was Madison's turn to take the stage. She walked alone to the front, making noise and leading the zombie horde onto the wooden bridge. Meanwhile, Alicia and Elena's nephew waited below in a speedboat. Although the zombies moved slowly, the overwhelming sight of the endless horde made Madison inevitably nervous. After leading them to the end of the bridge, she leaped into the sea without hesitation. The zombies followed suit, plunging into the water like dumplings. With the help of Alicia and the nephew, Madison successfully climbed onto the speedboat, and the hotel's zombies were finally cleared. That evening, everyone gathered for a rare celebration banquet, except for Oscar and his mother-in-law, who likely still harbored resentment towards Elena. Strand took the initiative to find Oscar and saw him standing at the door of a guest room, seemingly guarding something inside. Indeed, inside was his bride, the only zombie who had escaped during the day's clearing operation. Strand, having recently lost his own beloved, could empathize with Oscar's feelings, but also understood that self-deception would only lead to losing oneself. After Strand's persuasion, Oscar finally chose to let go, tearfully handing over the keycard to Strand so he could enter the room and deal with his zombie wife for him. In the community where Nick resided, he had recently gained favor among the community for his outstanding performance in a transaction with a gang. This time, Nick had come up with another brilliant idea. He crushed drugs into powder, mixed in a large amount of milk powder, and then repressed the mixture into pills. Soon, countless bottles of the new medications appeared. With these drugs, he could barter for more essential supplies from the gang. Even the community's leader, the doctor, had to take a fresh look at Nick, particularly after the next day's successful trade with the gang, which went off without a hitch. To acknowledge Nick's contribution, the doctor allocated a single room to him. That evening, Nick also caught the attention of Lucy, and their relationship quickly deepened. However, the very next day, an emergency arose. A scout responsible for daily patrols and external missions, feeling the acute shortage of supplies, fled the community with his family. They had knowledge of the community's location, intelligence, and entry and exit strategies. The doctor was furious upon learning this, especially since several scouts had recently defected. He was forced to convene a brainwashing session to remind the community that death was not to be feared. The outside world was far more terrifying. He also issued a decree that no one should leave the community during this time. Nick, who had been liaising with the gang, was displeased, particularly since it was the day of a scheduled trade. If he broke the deal, there was no telling how the gang would react. Nick wanted to argue with the doctor, but this time the doctor was unyielding, refusing to let Nick leave. Nick resorted to Plan B, seeking help from Lucy, whose influence was second only to the doctor's, but she sided with the doctor without hesitation. They had a fierce argument, but Lucy underestimated Nick's determination. Later, he conspired with a familiar scout to sneak out after dark for the supermarket trade with the gang. Contrary to the growing crisis in the community, life at the hotel was visibly improving under Madison's leadership. The group began rebuilding the estate, reinforcing the entrance barriers, and even managed to fix the generator. The ice maker at the bar was now back in operation as well. In a post-apocalyptic world, enjoying a cold beer was quite a luxury. To avoid drawing outside attention, they decided to run the generator only a few hours a week, just enough to ensure basic needs, especially turning it off at night. Just as everyone was envisioning their bright future, someone rang the doorbell. Strand went to open the door, only to be stabbed in the abdomen by the visitor. It's the mother of the bride, who had intended to avenge her zombie daughter, but ended up attacking Strand by mistake. Fortunately, the injury was not fatal, and with everyone's urgent care, Strand was temporarily out of danger. However, medical supplies in the hotel were scarce, and nearby pharmacies had long been looted. Elena knew of a place a few hours' drive from the hotel where they could get medicine, but her expression indicated that it was a risky endeavor. Nevertheless, to save Strand, Madison was willing to take the risk. Before leaving, she insisted on locking up the bride's mother to prevent further harm. Finally, Madison, Oscar, and Elena set off in a group. They quickly arrived at their destination, which turned out to be the supermarket where Nick often conducted his trades with the gang. Madison's trio brought a box of fresh seafood, planning to exchange it for some medicine. Elena had a relative in the gang, and with his help, the trade was swiftly concluded. But just as they prepared to leave, the sound of interrogation echoed from a room upstairs. It was the gang boss interrogating a family of the scout who had escaped from Nick's community. They had been unfortunate enough to run into the gang soon after their escape. To Nick's concern, as the gang recognized the scout from the community, they would eventually target it. The boss was now extracting the community's location through torture. Madison overheard the exchange, and when she heard mention of a disheveled American also residing in the community, she instantly thought of her son. Ignoring Elena's objections, she burst into the interrogation room, questioning the scout if the American was named Nick. However, the scout, unsure of Madison's intentions, suddenly fell silent. Madison was forcibly removed from the room. By evening, Madison and the others returned to the hotel with the medicine, ensuring Strand's safety. Alicia asked Elena why they had returned so late, and Elena simply recounted Madison's near confrontation with the gang. Just as Alicia was astounded by her mother's impulsive actions, she noticed the hotel's sign was lit up, glaringly conspicuous in the darkness. She found her mother and chastised her for potentially endangering everyone by drawing outside attention. Madison, however, had done this intentionally, hoping Nick would see it. Alicia was speechless, as there was no certainty that the American was Nick, and even if it was, they couldn't risk everyone's safety for one person. After some heartfelt persuasion from Alicia, Madison relented and they turned off the generator. But someone had already noticed the light. It was Travis. By dawn, a large group of survivors had gathered outside the hotel, demanding refuge, attracted by the previous night's sign light, just like Travis. Although they were determined to keep the doors shut upon seeing Travis, Madison couldn't stay calm anymore, allowing him to slip in through the crack in the door while the others remained outside. Madison wondered where Chris had gone, a story that began a few days earlier. After Chris shot the farmer, Travis was angry but couldn't bring himself to punish his own son and reluctantly cleaned up after him. This involved patching up a wounded companion and burying the farmer next to his deceased relatives. Meanwhile, Chris, Brandon, and others sat around the fire, drinking beer, laughing, and eating the farmer's roast chicken, which Travis couldn't stand to watch. He called his son outside, admonishing him for his disregard for life and lack of remorse after killing. However, Chris didn't think he had done anything wrong. A week passed, and as the chickens were nearly gone, the group planned to leave. But their injured companion hadn't yet recovered, and Brandon and the others started discussing what to do with him. Carrying him would be a burden. Travis overheard their conversation and pleaded with them not to kill again, especially since the injured man was their friend. He suggested staying at the farm a little longer for his recovery. Brandon had no intentions of staying at the farm any longer, and even Chris agreed. An angry Travis grabbed Chris's gun to protect the injured man, staying by his side all night. After that, Chris approached his father with breakfast, a change from his usual behavior. He began to confess, admitting that his previous actions were wrong. Travis thought his son had finally come to his senses, but in that moment, Chris overpowered him and called for Brandon to come in. It turned out Chris had been pretending all along. Travis was held tightly, unable to do anything but watch as the group shot the injured man in the head. After this incident, Brandon's group no longer accepted Travis. What's worse, Chris chose to side with Brandon, unwilling to associate with his father anymore. Travis was completely disappointed in his son, and the two parted ways, leaving it uncertain if they would ever reunite. After leaving his father, Chris likely wouldn't have good days ahead, but Travis couldn't let go of his recently departed son, feeling that he hadn't fulfilled his responsibilities as a father. Madison could only try to console him using both her words and warm muscles, staying by his side throughout the night. When Travis woke up the next day and saw a large crowd gathered outside, he spotted his wife in the forefront, standing with two young men. He immediately recognized them as Brandon and others who had left with his son. He rushed downstairs and into the crowd, searching for his son, but not finding him. Madison watched Travis with a flicker in her eyes, revealing that these people were the survivors previously turned away from the door. Unable to ignore their plight, Madison and the others allowed them to take refuge in the underground parking garage. They were provided with food, and Oscar's doctor brother offered them medical help. More survivors arrived at the hotel, including Brandon and others who had left with Chris. They had been noisy since they arrived, quickly drawing Madison's attention. Brandon had a dislocated arm and hoped for immediate medical attention. From the conversation, Madison learned that they had been in an accident. The driver, a 16-year-old boy from Los Angeles with no license, had died on the spot. Hearing this, Madison suspected that the young driver might have been Chris. Unsure, she sought Strand's advice on whether to inform Travis of his son's possible demise. Strand suggested not to tell, as Chris was Travis's last hope, and knowing his death might take away his will to live. Taking Strand's advice, Madison decided to get rid of Brandon and the other person from the hotel. She lied, saying they needed priority treatment and had to be taken to another room. The other survivors, unaware of the truth, were unhappy with this queue jumping and gathered closely behind Madison and her group. The commotion eventually alerted Travis. Madison saw her plan had failed and had no choice but to face the tragic news with Travis. After being brought back to a hotel room, Brandon first demanded treatment for his injured arm and then a car to leave. Travis suppressed his anger and agreed with him. He could even expertly pop Brandon's dislocated arm back into place. Brandon then recounted what had happened. After parting ways with Travis at the farm that day, they soon realized that the road was not as peaceful as they had imagined. They were forced to drive day and night, and before long, Brandon and his group were utterly exhausted. Chris volunteered to help drive, considering his fresh driving skills and their fatigue, but it wasn't long before an accident occurred. The pickup truck rolled several times on the road, and Chris was thrown out through the windshield. By the time the two others crawled out, they found Chris with a broken neck, breathless. Upon hearing the news of his son's death, Travis was devastated. Before leaving, he casually asked where Chris's body was. Brandon's man replied that after pulling Chris's body out, they buried him under a tree by the roadside. However, Travis noticed a discrepancy in their story. How could they pull Chris out if he was thrown from the windshield? Clearly, the two were lying. In a swift move, Travis locked the door and began to beat them, demanding the truth. As it turned out, Chris hadn't died instantly in the crash, but suffered leg injuries that left him unable to walk. Knowing his fate, Chris had experienced the same demise as his injured companion before him, shot in the head. With this revelation, Travis lost all control, grabbing Brandon and unleashing a flurry of punches and kicks. The violence escalated in the room, with Travis unleashing his fury. During this, Oscar found the key and tried to intervene, but Travis jammed it in the door gap. Brandon and his man were beaten to death in the end. When the dust settled, Travis sat on the ground, soulless with a vacant stare. Meanwhile, in the community where Nick stayed, they also faced a big crisis. Nick sneaked into the medical room and took several bottles of pills, preparing to trade with the gang as agreed. But upon reaching the destination, Nick learned that the gang boss had found out the location and entry methods of the community and was preparing to attack, no longer needing to trade drugs with them. Nick was shocked to discover that the scout who had fled the community had been captured by the gang, tortured for information, and then killed. The boss didn't harm Nick but sent him back with a message, suggesting that the community members would do well to leave voluntarily. Upon returning, Nick reported the enemy situation to the doctor and Lucy. Outnumbered and outgunned, they had no chance if they resisted. As the three discussed strategies, a patient behind the curtain turned into a zombie and attacked Nick from behind. The doctor reacted quickly, fending off the zombie, freeing Nick from the entanglement, but at the cost of a bite on his own arm. The zombie continued its assault, and a nurse and patient were accidentally bitten. Coming to his senses, Nick fought back, plunging his fingers into the zombie's eyes, ending the zombie's rampage. After the crisis was averted, the two individuals who were bitten decided to sacrifice themselves by running into the horde of zombies outside the quarantine zone. However, the bitten doctor did not follow suit because everyone in the community believed he had immunity to the virus. Nick had long seen through the doctor's facade. Since they were still clinging to the community and unwilling to leave, Nick did not want to stay and risk death. He packed his bags, hoping Lucy would join him, but she refused to abandon everyone else. Upon seeing this, the doctor confessed that he, in fact, had no immunity. The reason he didn't turn into a zombie after being bitten in the past was that the biter was not an infected individual, but a drug-addicted boy who merely looked like a zombie. Lucy touched the doctor's forehead and noticed he had a fever, a sign that it was only a matter of time before he turned into a zombie this time. Despite this, Lucy chose to stay. She had long considered the community her home, and emotional ties aren't easily severed, just as Madison felt towards her husband at that moment. Travis was facing expulsion from the hotel for violating the rule against harming others, a rule Madison herself had set. Even though she had made significant contributions to the hotel, it didn't change the community's firm stance, especially Oscar's, who was still in a coma after being hit in the head by Travis. After much consideration, Madison couldn't bear the thought of her husband wandering alone and decided to leave the hotel with him. Her daughter Alicia agreed with her decision. As they prepared to rest for the night before setting out in the morning, Oscar's doctor brother, along with a group of men, burst into Madison's room and began to beat Travis without explanation. It turned out that Oscar had succumbed to his injuries despite his brother's best efforts to save him. The brother, filled with resentment, could not let the instigator walk away so easily. In the midst of this, Alicia unexpectedly appeared and stabbed the man in the chest, plunging the room into chaos. Fortunately, Strand arrived in time with his gun and managed to control the situation. Madison knew they couldn't stay a second longer and had to leave immediately with her family. Before leaving, Strand seemed hesitant. He no longer wished to drift outside and decided to stay at the hotel alone, giving his handgun to Madison and wishing them well. Watching Madison and her family leave, he wondered if they would ever meet again. Driving through the night, Madison's family was still on the lookout for Nick. They arrived at the supermarket that was the gang's stronghold, only to find it deserted. They guessed that the gang was probably on their way to attack the community. A foul smell caught Madison's attention, and they soon discovered the address of the community on the bodies of the Scouts' family. It seemed that Madison was headed for the community to find Nick, unaware that Nick had already left the community alone during the day. Nick calmly watched the zombies pass by, his face serene as the blood of the zombies on him masked their perception. Suddenly, the sound of machinery roared in the distance. Through his binoculars, Nick saw a helicopter landing at the US-Mexico border. In the zombie apocalypse, it was rare to see aircraft. Thinking it might be a refugee camp there, Nick decided to return to the community. At this point, the community's doctor, weakened by the zombie virus, could only rely on drugs to alleviate his pain. Nick told the doctor about the helicopter landing, suggesting that perhaps the people in the community could settle down in a new refuge. Sensing his life drawing to a close, the doctor finally agreed to Nick's proposal. As dawn broke, the heavily armed gang arrived as expected, ready to seize the rare community shelter in the apocalypse. To get inside, they had to go through the surrounding horde of zombies. Relying on their superior numbers, they did not smear themselves with zombie blood, but instead shot their way through to clear a path. Once they entered the community, the robbers were ecstatic, but they quickly realized the community was deserted, except for the dying doctor hiding in the shadows. Taking advantage of the gang's distraction, he made a dash for the bus that connected the inside and outside, driving it away and thereby exposing a huge gap in the wire fence. The zombies poured in through the gap instantaneously. There was only this one exit from the community, and the gang was now utterly doomed. In the face of the zombie onslaught, any resistance was futile. It was some time later that Travis and his family also arrived at the community, but now there were no signs of life, only bodies and wandering zombies everywhere. The gang members had become one of them. Alicia noticed the bus still flashing its lights, and then they found the infected doctor, barely alive. After revealing Nick's direction, he took his last breath, completing his mission. Meanwhile, Nick and Lucy were leading the community residents towards the US-Mexico border. Thanks to everyone's disguises, the journey had been peaceful. Just as they were about to reach their destination, a group of armed individuals suddenly appeared and began shooting wildly at the defenseless people. They stood no chance and were quickly gunned down, leaving only Nick and Lucy alive, who were then taken captive. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.